Hi there, my name's Adam Nayman. This is another Ringer Movies channel video essay, and it's a sequel to one that we did a couple of years ago on 10 Oscars that we think the Academy would like to have back. Second guessing the Oscars is almost like a national pastime, especially with benefit of hindsight. There's lots to choose from. So we decided to keep the same rules as before, which is we're not dealing with movies made before 1950, and we're limiting it to actual nominees. The fact that this year's Oscar race is proving hard to gauge and has the potential for some pretty disastrous choices, I think, makes this exercise in looking back and second guessing, that much more fun. So let's get started.
We are assembled here somewhat reluctantly.
So 1969.
The nominees for Best Director are
Sir Carol Reed for Oliver,
Stanley Kubrick for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
and the winner is Carol Reed for Oliver.
In case you're wondering how much the Oscars actually mean, remember that Stanley Kubrick never won a competitive Academy Award. It's a fate that he shared with, among other great filmmakers, Alfred Hitchcock. Their mastery, we might say, transcended statuettes, but the reasons for Kubrick not winning are kind of interesting. His best chance, I think, was in 1969, when 2001: A Space Odyssey was hovering at the top of year-end Critic 10 Best lists, and also the American box office. The movie was a gigantic hit and a cultural conversation piece, and really kind of, I think, invented the idea of Stanley Kubrick as this hermetic visionary auteur. The technical complexity of the movie's production was well documented. It represented a landmark in production design and cinematography and special effects. But what was truly remarkable was how Kubrick was able to synthesize such a wide range of aesthetic influences, from painting and sculpture and philosophy, how he was able to put that together and capture the popular imagination with something that was pretty high-end and in some ways sort of obscure. Over time, 2001 has gone from being a movie that people were confused by to a movie that people feel incredible certainty about in terms of its images and its iconography. It's widely recognized as a touchstone, sort of the equivalent cinematically of the monolith itself. It's something that transmits influence and inspiration to generations of filmmakers who want to sort of reach out to it and take from it. It'd probably be easier to list all the subsequent science fiction movies that weren't made at least partially in 2001's image. That's an awful lot to say about 2001, and it's nothing against Carol Reed, a very talented veteran British director who had made his own great masterpiece in the 1940s with The Third Man. It's nothing against him that 2001 had that impact. Reed did a pretty fine job translating the stage musical adaptation of Oliver Twist to the screen. He managed a small army of child performances, most of which ended up being very charming. Oliver was a big, family-friendly musical. The moment in the late 1960s the ground was shifting under Hollywood's feet, Oliver was celebrated for those old-fashioned qualities. It was seen as sort of a last gasp of movies for everybody. It remains the last G-rated film to win Best Picture. 2001 was a movie about the future, not just within its narrative, but I think the future fusion of art house aesthetics and blockbuster scale and movies as conversation pieces. Kubrick's consolation prize for having Reed pick his pocket for Best Director is to have had his own much larger and more significant place in movie history, and again to be a really stellar example of how little the Oscars mean. 1977.
Piper Laurie and Carey, and Beatrice Straight in Network. And the winner is
Beatrice Straight in Network.
Now, the last time I did one of these videos, I complained about Sidney Lumet's Network winning a major Oscar over Brian De Palma's Carey for Faye Dunaway winning Best Actress over Sissy Spacek. And my feeling is I might as well double down. Straight's very fine. Was a very fine actress. She was a Broadway stalwart. She won a Tony for her role in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, but she is best known for this strange footnote, which is that she has the least screen time of any actor to win an Academy Award. Her appearance in Network is basically a one-scene wonder. Depending on how you're timing it, it's somewhere between 5 and 6 minutes. She's playing the wife of William Holden's character, who has been cheating on her, and she just lays into him with this furious intensity. Network is a movie made up of angry speeches, and Strait gives one of the best ones. She holds her own with the rest of an A-list cast, and because she makes such a strong impression in such a short period of time, and because Network was so respected, especially by the actors branch of the Academy, that kind of carried her to this slight upset Oscar. There's not much more that she could have done with the part, but if we're really talking about doing more with less, I think you have to give it up for Piper Laurie in Carrie, who takes a potentially stock part as an overbearing, Bible-thumping single mother, and she just blasts it into the stratosphere. It's a horror movie, and a great horror movie, but Laurie gives this character literary dimension and operatic intensity. Margaret White is a tragic figure. The loathing that she has for her teenage daughter, Carrie, is rooted in self-hatred about her own decisions. And Laurie, who was always an electric and modern actress in her youth, she makes sure that this character's pain is legible in between these bouts of cruelty. You can see how much hurting Carrie hurts her as well. Not that this stops her. Brian De Palma is one of the great filmmakers in terms of riling up his audience, in terms of getting us to want to see characters get their comeuppance, in terms of tension and release. Laurie in Carrie transforms herself into a vessel for that catharsis. We need to see Carrie fight back against her mother. We are caught up in those blood-red emotions of humiliation and revenge. Laurie's final sequences are terrifying. The moment where she is skewered with a series of kitchen knives by her daughter using her telepathy. It's played for grandeur. It's not just a kill scene. It feels religious or maybe sacrilegious. The final expression that Laurie gives as her Saint Sebastian moment happens, as her Jesus Christ pose moment happens, it's like a death mask of ecstasy. It's the sort of image that stays with you forever. And as good as Beatrice Straight is in her 5 minutes, Piper Laurie's performance has lasted 50 years. And I think that it's a no-brainer in retrospect that she should have won. (1978).
Tonight's nominees for an outstanding performance in a lead role are Richard Dreyfuss in Goodbye Girl and John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. And the winner is a new heavyweight champ, Richard Dreyfuss!
John Travolta was also in Carrie as Nancy Allen's sadistic himbo boyfriend. With everything I was saying about De Palma making you hate people and want to see bad things happen to them.
Just keep your tits on.
Applies to Travolta in Carrie. He's hateful and sexy at the same time, and he also gets what's coming to him. A year later in Saturday Night Fever, Travolta had his real Star is Born moment, at least in movies. The opening sequence in the film, where Travolta as Tony Manero is just walking through Bay Ridge, housing 2 slices of pizza at the same time. It's one of the great movie entrances. The sidewalk becomes like a catwalk for Tony to strut his stuff. He walks around like he owns the city, and the city kind of seems to be in thrall to his presence. It's great filmmaking, it's great editing, but Travolta is the charisma that makes it happen. The key to his performance in Saturday Night Fever is that he's able to make us believe 2 things at once: that Tony Manero is absolutely a nobody, and that he's also a star in waiting. And instead of playing these qualities as contradictions, Travolta makes sure that they inform each other in every line reading and every physical gesture. The scenes of him dancing at the Odyssey nightclub, where we're saying about 2001 having an influence, there's even a 2001 allusion in Saturday Night Fever. The scenes of him dancing are what people remember about Saturday Night Fever. There's a long list of parodies and tributes he never really lived the dancing thing down. It's even present in his resurrection role in Pulp Fiction. But Travolta does terrific character work throughout Saturday Night Fever as well. He's terrific in the dramatic scenes with Tony's family. He makes for a passionate and sort of frustrating romantic lead, and he has a lot of moments where he is sort of just by himself marinating in this combination of yearning and insecurity. So he's more than just the disco sequences. Now, the actual Best Actor winner that year was Richard Dreyfuss, who was well cast in The Goodbye Girl as a fussy, enervating, unbearable actor. He wasn't just satirizing acting, he was playing an amplified version of himself, or Richard Dreyfuss as I think he was perceived at large. The Goodbye Girl is very dated. It has not aged particularly well. As a movie, it sort of has the rhythms of a sitcom. I think Dreyfuss got a lot of credit because we see his character rehearsing and performing Shakespeare.
Made in my book, wherein my soul recorded the history of all her secret thoughts.
Excuse me, please.
Is it over?
It is for me.
And obviously, not totally seriously, the production of Richard III that his character is acting in is somewhat absurd. So Dreyfuss gets to be Shakespearean and comic at the same time. There's multiple levels to what he's doing. But he was much better in a different movie that same year. He was much better for Steven Spielberg in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where he's playing a surrogate for Spielberg. I think The Goodbye Girl was a reward for both roles, and it makes sense. But Travolta had to spend the rest of his entire career living down how impactful and how charismatic he was in Saturday Night Fever. I don't think there's any question which performance has lived longer in the pop cultural mind. And it's a shame now that even after Pulp Fiction, Travolta is still without his Oscar. He should have gotten it the first time out. 1986.
It's time now to honor the nominated directors for the dreams they've given us this year. Sidney Pollack for Out of Africa. Akira Kurosawa for Ran. And the winner is Memories. Sidney Pollack!
I personally might give Sidney Pollack, or might have given Sidney Pollack an Oscar for one of his many superb supporting performances. I think he's the best actor among people who were primarily known as directors. He is terrific in parts in his own movies, like in Tootsie. I think one reason that Pollack was such a good director of actors is because he was such a skilled actor himself. That said, the Best Director prize he got for Out of Africa is not the most impressive thing in the world. The movie is a sweeping, old-fashioned 19th century epic based on a memoir by the Danish writer Karen Blixen. It's a love story set against a backdrop that's, visually spectacular and politically complex. It's a post-colonial narrative. It has the languid pacing of a movie that's trying to say serious things about culture clash and history. A movie that feels like it is trying to become a classic before your eyes in real time, and it has a lot of star power. You have this romance between Meryl Streep and Robert Redford, who are both sophisticated and classy, and they wear great clothes. It's all very picturesque, and it's all extremely boring. Pollack is a very professional and workmanlike director. Sometimes he can bring a lot of energy to a production when he makes comedies, when he makes thrillers. Out of Africa just kind of sits on the screen. It could almost be a parody of 80s upper middle brow prestige picture making, while Akira Kurosawa's visionary and valedictory King Lear adaptation Ran looks like nothing else before, nothing else since. A magisterial and color-coded vision of war as hell, with images of nature that don't seem to have been filmed so much as conjured at a distance. There's a lot of God's eye perspective in this movie, and that doesn't speak to Kurosawa's arrogance. It's just an incredible perspective after decades and decades of making movies, how far he's able to pull back, literally and figuratively, without taking us out of the drama. Kurosawa wanted this film to collapse the distance between a historical image of Japan, between this feudal society and the post-Hiroshima Japan. And that's why the film, Ran, feels ancient and modern. It feels like a vision of the apocalypse, but it's also out of time. It has a cast of thousands, and they get deployed in passages of pure abstraction, of patterning bodies and formations. But again, even though we have to pull back to see these things happen, the movie is not cold. It's quite mournful and harsh. It's a movie where that sense of distance ultimately leads to some extremely raw feelings. It might seem harsh to say that the difference between Out of Africa and Ran is the difference between professionalism and genius. Kurosawa had already won Academy Awards for his work in the Best Foreign Language category, but given his stature, given the shadow that he casts over so many years of movie making and so many directors, it was a real opportunity to reward a legend, and it didn't happen. But again, Ran is a movie that continues to be appreciated and studied and to serve as an inspiration, and it'd be hard to claim those things for Out of Africa. 1998.
And the magnificent artists nominated this year for Best Actor in a Leading Role are Roberto Benigni in Life is Beautiful, Nick Nolte in Affliction, and the Oscar goes to Roberto Benigni in Life is Beautiful.
In Paul Schrader's drama Affliction, Nick Nolte plays Wade Whitehouse, an alcoholic small-town policeman who's been scarred by years of abuse at the hands of his father, trying very much not to repeat the sins of the father and falling into some of the same patterns. Wade is a man for whom self-destruction is a way of life. He's like a wounded animal who tends to corner himself. It's hard to watch him, but you also can't take your eyes off of him because of Nick Nolte. Affliction is a grim, frostbitten thriller. Critics thought it was Schrader's best work in years. It was a surprise award contender, and there was a feeling that Nolte, who had been superb for several decades, was maybe due for a kind of lifetime achievement for being such a raw powerhouse presence in so many different kinds of films. In the end, though, Nolte could not compete, at least in the Academy members' eyes, with the mugging of the Italian superstar Roberto Benigni in Life is Beautiful, which was that year's surprise foreign language film hit and a bit of a pop cultural phenomenon. Benigni, who directed the film, starred in the film, plays a Jewish concentration camp inmate trying to shield his son from the horrors of the Holocaust by pretending that their internment is a game as a sort of a survival technique and to keep his son and himself from sinking into despair. Benigni mixes slapstick and sentimentality in the film as if he's trying to be the new Charlie Chaplin, and I think that's what he was going for. It's a movie that's about smiling through tears, and it was accused in some corners of trivializing its subject matter by turning the Holocaust into basically a pretense for a comedian's frivolous shtick. Many viewers, though, were charmed. Many viewers were moved. The movie was an awards magnet. And it makes for a fascinating contrast with Affliction. Affliction is a movie about the way fathers hurt their sons, how they can't help but hurt their sons. Life is Beautiful is a movie ultimately about paternal sacrifice, about the way that a father protects his son and allows him to have a life outside of this terrible trauma. It's an understatement to say that Nolte and Benigni's performances are very different. On some level, what Benigni is doing in Life is Beautiful is a kind of tour de force, but it panders to the audience's emotions. It's a performance designed to make you love the character, love the actor, whereas Nolte is doing something really hard. He's drawing us in and keeping us at arm's length at the same time. Now, on the Oscar telecast, Benigni sort of entered into the pantheon of Oscar night hijinks when he climbed over seats to accept his award and was just so profuse and so enthusiastic. His award made for good television, but in terms of quality, in terms of merit, Nick Nolte was robbed. 2000.
Okay, it's a little late, so we might as well jump right to it. For Best Picture tonight, here are the nominees. American Beauty, Bruce Cohen and Dan Jenks, producers. The Insider, Michael Mann and Peter Jan Bugge, producers. The Oscar goes to American Beauty.
Most of the really vanguard American movies that give 1999 its reputation as the quote-unquote best movie year ever, or at least one of the better movie years in the modern era, most of the movies that are really part of that reputation were bypassed at the Oscars, and that's to be expected. It's not like there were Best Picture nominations for Fight Club or The Matrix for being John Malkovich. Those are all really fascinating and compelling movies, but it was still a pretty decent crop of mainstream nominees. You have M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense coming in and getting love in a lot of the major categories. And you also had Michael Mann's whistleblower drama, The Insider, which fused Mann's very strong lyrical filmmaking style with ripped from the headlines subject matter about the tobacco industry. This was a very different movie than something like Manhunter or Heat, which have genre elements which play with procedural tropes. The Insider is a film that hews not just closely to the idea of realism in style, but reality itself as subject matter with a real sense of political principle and media critique. The film is beautifully made. It's got amazing performances from A-list actors like Al Pacino, Russell Crowe, and Christopher Plummer, who plays the venerable 60 Minutes correspondent Mike Wallace.
I don't plan to spend the end of my days wandering in the wilderness of National Public Radio. That decision I've already made.
Some of the most amazing acting that Plummer ever did, just transforming himself into this iconic television personality. Mike Wallace wasn't thrilled, but he should have been flattered to have Plummer play him that way. Mann moves away from genre in The Insider, but he doesn't sacrifice his identity. He doesn't sacrifice his sense of specificity, his idea of honor, having to rise to the occasion. These things are all encoded in The Insider, but it didn't connect at the box office. It was a film that was sort of tailor-made in some ways for award season, but it didn't have the reach that was expected. And a movie that did have that reach and that did connect and that, for better or worse, showed a way to make an audience feel that they were getting grown-up entertainment is American Beauty. And there's really no accounting for taste, because American Beauty is a movie that is filled with cheap shots at easy targets and revelations that had been made many, many times before. The idea that suburbia isn't all it's cracked up to be is hardly a breaking exclusive. There's something very easy about American Beauty, and there's something very TV-ish about American Beauty. When you look at the movie now, it doesn't feel like groundbreaking cinema. It feels like a forerunner of millennial prestige TV, and indeed Alan Ball, the screenwriter, did a lot of this stuff better when he ended up making 6 Feet Under than he did in American Beauty, which I think is also over-directed by Sam Mendes, who is reaching for visual poetry all the time and not really quite reaching it. Certainly not achieving the expressionistic flourishes you see in a movie like The Insider. That plastic bag blowing in the wind in American Beauty, that is an emblem of a film that's pretty lightweight in retrospect.
Don't worry, they have me under a restraining order.
2004.
The nominees for performance by an actress in a leading role are Diane Keaton in Something's Gotta Give, Charlize Theron in Monster, Charlize Theron in Monster.
Charlize Theron's performance as Aileen Wuornos in Monster ticks a lot of Oscar boxes. She's playing a real person, underwent a huge physical transformation to play the role. There were lots of feature articles and interviews about bravery and sacrifice, about the fact that she gained 30 pounds, that she shaved off her eyebrows, that she put on prosthetic teeth to play the role, and also that she's playing not just a real person, but a spectacularly unflattering character, a female serial killer who was a bit of a notorious media darling and someone where there's a lot of footage to measure the performance against and sort of see how it works as an impersonation. Roger Ebert said that Theron gave one of the greatest performances in the history of cinema, and I think that's a bit of a stretch. You know, the Oscar season is all about hyperbole. The needing to talk about the performance as monumental kind of gives the game away, which is that as impressive as Theron is in Monster, she doesn't disappear into the role. She's good, but it feels like a beautiful, glamorous actress pushing against typecasting. She's good, but she doesn't disappear. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, I wouldn't say that Diane Keaton disappears in Something's Gotta Give. In fact, she's playing a part that is very in keeping with her own legacy. She's playing a neurotic, intellectual, culture vulture type character, in this case, a divorced playwright. The movie is not important. The movie is not momentous or monumental. It has nothing to really say about human psychology. It's not a movie about a monster. It's a lightweight entertainment. But Keaton is effortless in it, and she's brilliant. She not only holds her own with Jack Nicholson as her main romantic foil, she believably seduces Keanu Reeves, who really should have made more romantic comedies because he's great at it. And she gives all of the dialogue, all of Nancy Meyer's dialogue, exactly the kind of wobbly topspin that it deserves.
Look, mister, I am going to dial 911, and you are not going to move. Zoe, hand me the phone.
Historically, the Oscars underrate comedy. In a way, it's a compliment to Keaton that she didn't win, because I think she made it look too easy. It might be sort of strange to put the performances side by side and say that, you know, what Keaton is doing is more worthy of praise. But again, I think sometimes less is more, and sometimes the Oscars forget this. So let's give Diane Keaton an award for a lovely movie. 2012.
Here are the nominees for achievement in directing. Michel Hazanavicius, The Artist. Terrence Malick, The Tree of Life. And the Oscar goes to Michel Hazanavicius.
Terrence Malick's Tree of Life is one of the most formally radical movies ever nominated for an Academy Award, much less for Best Picture or Best Director. In fact, it looks very strange looking at it on a list of nominated movies or placing it alongside something like The Artist, which is a clever and proficient and pretty airless little silent movie pastiche, a movie that is made with the most crowd-pleasing of intentions. Hollywood loves celebrating itself even through a European proxy. They love this idea of nostalgia and love letters to the movies, and a bit like Life is Beautiful, if a little less maudlin and obnoxious, The Artist was the little foreign language movie that could. It was the subtitled movie, although in this case not so much subtitles as intertitles, since it plays as a silent film. It leveraged that stuff into a surprise Best Picture nomination, and then a very sort of affectionate Best Picture win over a kind of middling field. And this is fair enough. The Artist is enjoyable on its own terms. There is a certain amount of nimbleness and slapstick agility to the staging, but the terms are so limited. What Michel Hazanavicius is doing in this film shows talent and proficiency, and that's about it. What Malick is doing in Tree of Life is beyond that. The movie's a meditation on childhood, on mortality, and on morality, and it's just so expansive. It's an intimate and in some ways autobiographical film, but it has a genuinely cosmic scope. It leaps through time and space in a way that evokes nothing less than 2001. A bit like 2001 versus Oliver, no question which of these movies has its place in history. 2013.
Here are the nominees for actor in a supporting role. Philip Seymour Hoffman, The Master. Christoph Waltz, Django Unchained. Christoph Waltz, Django Unchained.
Christoph Waltz absolutely deserved his first Oscar acting for Quentin Tarantino in Inglourious Basterds. The arrogant and loquacious Nazi Hans Landa was a part that Waltz was born to play. Tarantino has even said that he might have shut Inglourious Basterds down if he hadn't come across Waltz, if he hadn't found a brilliant and, of course, bilingual comic actor to play that part in English, and German, and French. It's a singular acting achievement.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
Now, The second Oscar vault one for Tarantino for Django Unchained, I think feels a little less necessary, and there is a case to be made that he was not the best guy in his category that year. Not only is the righteous dentist turned bounty hunter Dr. King Schultz a less inspired creation than Hans Landa, but the grinning, hyper-articulate delivery style feels warmed over. There's skill and sophistication in what Waltz is doing, but it's almost like a victory lap around what he did in Inglourious Basterds, and he's not even the most memorable supporting character in his own movie. I don't think he can compete with Samuel L. Jackson as Stephen, a performance that is tinged with genuine risk and daring, and which bounces back on the history of Jackson's collaboration with Tarantino. Jackson wasn't nominated, though, and my choice in the category would be Philip Seymour Hoffman in The Master. The cult leader Lancaster Dodd is a marvelous comic creation. He's a narcissistic, alcoholic, self-deluding entrepreneur. The incredible regard he has for himself is tied to this deep insecurity. Dodd is trying to retain a sense of equilibrium from his followers. Sometimes figuratively, he's trying to seem like his ideas stand up. Sometimes literally, he's just trying to keep his feet because he's a drunk.
Oh, God!
But Hoffman refuses to turn the character into a joke. That would be too easy. He instead plays a guy who is clinging to the belief that we contain multitudes, clinging to the belief that flaws can be expunged and that perfection is achievable, and that this was the final movie that Hoffman made with Paul Thomas Anderson. Obviously, they had an incredible working relationship, legacy for all those parts. He's remarkable in the film. The level of his performance opposite Joaquin Phoenix, they both kind of elevate each other. He did win an acting prize, split with Phoenix at the Venice Film Festival, so it's not like the performance went unrewarded. But given that Waltz already had one for acting for Tarantino, this is just an unfortunate miss, I think. And finally,
here are the nominees for a performance by an actor in a leading role. Daniel Kaluuya, Get Out. Gary Oldman, Darkest Hour.
And the winner is Gary Oldman, Darkest Hour.
Gary Oldman has given many brilliant and inventive performances over the years, but he won his Oscar for donning makeup and doing an impression of a historical figure, which I think is the most inevitable way Oldman could have won an Oscar, and probably the most boring as well. He's playing Winston Churchill in The Darkest Hour. This is Gary Oldman we're talking about. He obviously has tremendous skills as a verbal and physical mimic, but the movie rarely rises above the level of an actor showcase. As a movie, it's kind of like a delivery device for the Oldman performance.
The British government, which would be Hitler's puppet. A government set up under Mosley or some such person. No.
Meanwhile, Jordan Peele's Get Out, which is one of the keynote movies of the 21st century, a wry, devastating social satire that puts the lie to ideas of post-racial America. Not only is it a better movie than The Darkest Hour, it's just a more interesting use of a lead performance. The movie is not exactly a showcase for Daniel Kaluuya. It's more like the movie is happening to his character. He is the protagonist of Get Out. He, in some ways, is the victim of the film. He's the hero of the film, and he's the conduit through which we come to see its ideas and see its themes. This is a movie built around metaphors of vision, and Kaluuya gives Jordan Peele a pair of wide, staring, helpless eyes that recur throughout Get Out as its signature image. The expression on Kaluuya's face as his character enters into this idea of the sunken place is one of the most iconic movie images of recent years, which becomes an emblem of this mix of terror and epiphany at the heart of Peele's film. Get Out is excellently written. It's very nicely designed visually. It has really vivid and creepy comic performances around the edges. But Kaluuya is the one who has to navigate the narrative and the shifts in tone, who has to go from suspicion and wariness to terror and righteous fury. And he holds the film together. The award that he ended up winning for playing Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah, also deserved, but kind of compensation too, I think, for not winning in Get Out. Very few people have won Academy Awards for horror films. This year there's a chance that Demi Moore will join Kathy Bates for Misery in winning an Oscar for a quote-unquote horror movie. But other than Anthony Hopkins in The Silence of the Lambs, there hasn't really been a Best Actor winner in that category. Kaluuya, I think, would have been a memorable and deserved and precedent-setting Oscar in a lot of ways. He did get one a couple of years later, and that's deserved. Who did we forget? Who do we miss? Who should we do next time? Who were we totally wrong about this time? Hopefully this year's Oscars will provide grist for the mill for future installments. But until then, Adam Nayman with a Ringer video essay. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for complaining. We'll see you guys next time.